Hi everyone, I am Michael from King's College London, and I want to present a collaboration with Graham Comode from the University of Warwick and Minos Garfalakis from the Technical University of Crete. The problem I will be talking about relates to some space, which we can think of as some Euclidean space, and I will use as an example a map of the UK, and maybe we want to know what's going on in the north. And we are specifically interested in statistics that we can merge from statistics over smaller regions. So let's say we have the statistic over A and the statistic over B. We want to be able to merge the statistic into 1 over A union B. And this includes a lot of common aggregators. And the reason we require this is because we don't know how the data look like. We don't know how over what these statistics will be done. We don't know which kind of regions will be asked about. And we are therefore forced to split the space up and collect statistic for each little space region we prepare. So we can think of this as a kind of repository of space regions. And from those space regions, we can build the region we're interested in. And we will be able to construct one region which is fully contained in this green region we're interested in. And for those we know, we can just use these statistics over these bins, merge them, and then we get a statistic over this union. But for this border region, we do not know what's going on. So we might want to include the border region sometimes to get, for instance, an upper bound, or not include it and get a lower bound, or the other way around if our statistics work the other way around. And as you can see here, there are 64 border cells, and each border cell has an area or hypervolume of 1 divided by 1024, because we have a grid of 32 times 32, which is 1024. And the question is, can we do better than that? So we have nothing else to work with. We only can split the space. Can we split the space in a better way? So here we presumed we have to split the space into disjoint partitions. What if we presume that this repository of bins allows for overlappings, that we can have 2 grids? How much better can we do? So let's look at a red grid and an orange grid. The red grid has more horizontal partitions, and the orange grid has more vertical partitions. But in total, they have the same number of bins as the original blue grid. And then, if we have our green region, we can give one part to the red grid and the other 2 parts to the orange grid. And then we have this border region, as you can see in gray. And these are the border bins. So we will have 6 border bins from the red grid, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 16 border bins from the orange grid. 6 plus 16 is 22, and each of these border bins has a volume of 1 divided by 512, because we have 512 bins of each of these grids, and all these grid cells have the same area. And we then get 4.29% for this volume of this border region. So we managed to improve upon it by just using one more grid, just overlapping the bins a bit. And so before you saw a very low resolution example, and the advantage of the 2-grid scheme gets much better for larger resolution. So let's fix the size of this border region to alpha. So you can pick alpha to be, let's say, 0.1%. And then the equi-width binning, which just has 1 grid, will need 1 divided by alpha to the power of 2, which for 0.1% would be 1,000,000. Obviously, this is O notation, so we have some hidden factors. And here we would have 1 divided by alpha to the power of 1.5. So for 0.1% alpha, this would be around 33,000. And again, we have some hidden factors. So let's look at the actual numbers. So let's say we fix the number of bins to 1,000,000, and let's just look at what is the alpha we get. So for very width binning, we get an alpha of 0.1%, which is what we were looking for. With regular binning, we get something in between 0.1 and 1%. So it's almost an order of magnitude worse, and it just gets worse the more bins we get. And also gets worse the more dimensions we have. So if we go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, we can see that the gap, again, is very large. And you can also see that there is a third competitor now, this elementary dyadic binning, which overtakes everyone at some point. And that point gets later and later for more dimensions, but in 2-dimension it's quite early, so this would be the binning of choice in this setting. Let me get back to the elementary binning, but let me go first to the question, is the equiwidth binning at least optimal if there's only one grid allowed? So could we, for instance, do by more than a constant factor better if we have some triangular kind of gridding or something like that? And the answer is no. Asymptotically, we need at least 1 divided by alpha to the power of the bins, and that is what an equiwidth binning also provides. So we are pretty much tight in that case. And if we now know more grids, we do get an upper bound, which is has this polylog expression with the dimensionality as an exponent. And if we look at the upper bound, which is given by this elementary dyadic binning I have shown in the previous plots, we get almost the same factor. It's 2 times larger the exponent in this case. And we also have some log-log factors, which are hidden here. And the question is, okay, is this lower bound maybe a bit too loose, or is there some other technique which has a better complexity? And that is an open question. So at this point, it's basically narrowed down to this factor of 2 and a couple log-log factors. And the upper bound is this elementary dyadic binning. So let me now give you a rough idea what that is. So each grid of the elementary dyadic binning has the same number of bins. So 16 times 1, 8 times 2, 4 times 4, 2 times 8, 1 times 16. So in this case, it would be 16 bins per grid. So we have, in this case, 5 possible grids. And it's called dyadic because we always have a 2 to the power of something number of partitions in each dimension. So we can also formulate it like this. And now let's look at how would we actually answer queries. So we know how to do a dyadic decomposition of a unit cube. So we can, if we are allowed to use all types of shapes, then we get this decomposition of a unit cube. Why is the unit cube interesting? It's because we imagine the space as a unit cube. And the worst case query for these kind of grid-based binnings is actually a query which touches almost the unit cube. And what we can do then is basically design query algorithms based on first doing the dyadic decomposition, perhaps just implicitly, and then merging some of these dyadic parts together. And in 3 dimensions, we will then get for the elementary dyadic binning this picture here. And as you can see here, it's not symmetric in the dimensions. So we have more divisions along one dimension than the others. So this decomposition is not symmetrical. Although the binning itself is symmetrical, we need to make some asymmetric choices in the query answering. And one can basically pick whichever dimension one wants to be the most precise one. And we can think of it now back to 2 dimensions in this kind of space. So the dyadic binning has all these different shapes. So if we limit the maximum resolution to 2 to the power of 6, which is 64, then we have here 64 times 64 grid. The dyadic binning would include all of these grids here. So it would include a 64 times 64, a 4 times 4, a 1 times 32, all these grids. Obviously, that's not great because it will also include the 64 times 64. So it would have a lot of bins. The elementary dyadic binning manages to get almost the same precision as the dyadic binning with much fewer bins by taking the diagonal. So all of these grids have the same number of bins. The equiwidth binning basically takes that same number in both dimensions, and the variwidth binning takes 1 grid for per dimension, which has more bins. So in arbitrarily many dimensions, we can think of the elementary dyadic binning to have grids along some hyperplane. The variwidth binning basically just has it d points on this hyperplane, and the equiwidth binning is just 1 point in this space. And the reason I'm introducing this is we can reason about query answering here. So each dyadic grid represents into which parts we will decompose the query. And we can basically decide how do we hand off these parts if we don't have the grid. So with an elementary dyadic binning, you can see here there's this downward motion. This is arbitrary, so it could be also a leftward motion. And this is this asymmetry I was talking about before. In the same way, we can also reason about variwidth query answer, which again is also asymmetric, which we also have seen in the example. And another question we were interested in, can we use these kind of techniques in a setting where we have sensitive data, and we cannot do a data-dependent binning because that would leak information about the data in very uncontrolled ways. So if we can just do a data-independent binning, we can actually release statistics which add the right amount of noise such that individuals are protected. And then we can actually create histograms over these data-independent binnings in order to create a sample which is consistent with the counts. So that would be a synthetic data generation type of task. And we evaluated how well each technique does in this task by fixing the aggregate variance, which is the precision of the outputted statistic, even for query boxes which are aligned with our binning. So even if we have, let's say, a regular grid and the box is perfectly aligned with the grid cells, even then we will have some noise. And this is what we fix here. And then we have also the precision of the alignment, which is this spatial type of error. And the best technique is vary width. It's not the elementary dyadic one because it has too many grids, which causes problems in this setting. And in more dimensions, this becomes even more pronounced. And we also go into how to sample from multiple grids in a consistent way, and talk a little bit about what we can achieve there. All right, so let me just give you a quick summary. So the basic problem setting is alpha binnings. So we are allowed to select a repository of bins. And for each of these bins, we will prepare some statistics. And then we get some query region, and we need to be able to produce a union of these bins, which gives us a Q minus, which is contained in the query region, and a Q plus, which contains the query region. And the difference of volume between Q plus and Q minus is at most alpha. In this, this problem, if we limit ourselves to non-overlapping repositories of bins, so basically like one grid, then equiwidth is asymptotically optimal. And for arbitrary binnings, we get this lower bound with the polylog, and we get the upper bound with the polylog, but with factor 2 and some log factors of difference between them. I thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to ask us any questions. You can find our emails in the pods paper.